Hey everyone, I'm Kaylee Skinner, managing editor at Mississippi Today, and I want to thank you all for coming to Mississippi Today's Member Book Club. I'm here tonight with Chef Vishwesh Bhatt, executive chef at Snack Bar in Oxford and author of I Am From Here, Stories and Recipes from a Southern Chef. Welcome, Chef Vish.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And of course, if you're here, you probably have either seen a review of his book or are very interested in it. It comes out officially tomorrow, so make sure to grab a copy. We are here tonight to just have a pretty casual conversation between us and our readers. And I say that to say at any moment, if you have a question, type it into the box and I will see it in the Q&A part and I'll be sure to try and answer it. We expect this to run about an hour. And with that, I guess I just want to dive right in. I've had time to ask you questions when I was interviewing you, but we have had some people turn in questions ahead of time. And one that I see repeatedly is what led you to become a chef? What are the forces that led you there?
I wasn't very good at anything else. Maybe that's. Well, no, I mean, I always really enjoyed food and eating. I love eating, and that led to me cooking because I was also very particular about what I liked and didn't like, and so I decided to cook for myself, and that then led to cooking in restaurants for beer money, which then led to realization that I really enjoyed being in restaurants. And 30 years later, here we are.
Right, and so you are from India originally, but you ended up in the South. Another question that really has sit with me that someone else submitted, I'm just going to read it here, is if you've read the book or the review, a lot of it, of course, it's recipes about food and how to make the food, but a lot of it is about place and you being from here. So you seem to define your Southernness as a matter of geography. I am Southern because I am from here. Do you see other connections between the place that you were born and the South?
I mean, there are several. India and America are connected from the very beginning. I mean, if we look at the story, if you want to, believe that story, Columbus set out looking for India, got lost, ended up in the West, and that's how, the West was discovered, and American continent was discovered. So, without India, there wouldn't be an America, like my mother used to say. Which is not necessarily true, but I mean, so it's from the very, very beginning, from the very inception of this country, there's been that connection. The second connection, and the very obvious one, is this country was colonized by the British, as was India, and the money to build the colonies in Virginia and Massachusetts and the original colonies, what came through the British East India Company. It's a lot of those folks who had made big fortunes in India, were also the ones that were financing the settling of this colony here. So there's that other connection, a historic connection. After that, there's the connection as those English and British settlers started coming here in the 1600s and mid 1600s. They brought with them Indian indentured servants to work and help them establish their homesteads. So folks that looked like me were here, from the very beginning. That's not very much talked about because it's not, a big part of the history, because the other tragedy of folks being brought here against their will, is certainly a more important discussion to this connection of ingredients, of food. So let's talk about that, and of how, things like rice and sugar and spices moved west, and then things like potatoes and tomatoes moved east. Corn also went east, and so then those things then drive what becomes our foodways, and they influence not only the food of India but also the food of Americas.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into another question I have, and for those of you watching, I am just like reading questions that I've already gotten prepared, but if at any moment you have one, please type it in the chat. I know you've lived in Oxford for many, many years now, but you've lived in different parts of the United States, and someone else was asking, since you've lived in other parts of the United States, do you consider the South distinct? And if yes, how?
I mean, the South is not a monolith, right? I
Sure.
mean, the South is quite diverse. Mississippi is very different from Virginia, and Virginia is very different from uh, Arkansas, and so on. So certainly the South is not a monolith, but it is a distinct place, partly because it remained mostly rural for a very long time.
Okay.
Um, Very importantly, because it was also the place where most of the folks who were enslaved were brought, and so they made a contribution to this culture, like that didn't happen in other places, out west, for example, or the Midwest. Uh, that makes South a special place because from the very beginning, from its inception, Southern cities were very international, just by the very fact that there were folks who were different were already here. Either they had been brought here, or they were coming through the ports like New Orleans and Charleston and Savannah.
Yeah. We spoke about this too, but I was taken when I was reading your cookbook that I am also not originally from the South. I'm not from Mississippi, but I live here. I have a house here. I have a family. But I find myself kind of stumbling sometimes over calling myself Southern. It feels like something that is not mine to choose because people here are so fiercely proud of being Southern. And that is probably more wrapped up in me. I probably should go to therapy about it. But I'm wondering have you ever gotten pushback about it? I mean, you've written a whole cookbook that's called I Am From Here.
Yeah.
And I'm
For
sure
sure, certainly there's pushback, right? But I mean, that's the whole point of it. It's like why does someone else get to claim this place when they're just when their grandparents got here, they were just as much an immigrant as I am. Why is it that somebody who's been here just a few years longer gets to claim the place, and and then we don't. So yeah, there is pushback, but then this is my answer to that is that's not how this works. If I want to put down roots here and I want to claim this place as my own, then I have every right to do so.
What made you choose this place? Because you could have lived, I'm sure, anywhere.
It was mutual. The place chose me, and I chose the place. I mean, I started working in Oxford at City Grocery. I knew that was a very special place, and so I just fell into that, and I, was very comfortable. And I knew as a young cook and then as a chef that I could go somewhere else, but I could live in Oxford and still work in a restaurant that was of very high quality and standard, and I wanted to be a part of it.
Absolutely. I do want to make sure we talk about food, so I'm going to ask you a couple of
Yes.
questions about the book specifically. Someone asked, this is a big question.
Yeah.
What recipe do you think best represents the heart of the book?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, I think the book, the way it's laid out, I mean, I very specifically chose the ingredients I did because those are ingredients that are common where I was born and are very common here. And so, I was trying to make that connection. But I mean, if there was one ingredient, I mean, if there were, let's see, there are two. There probably rice would be one because that's a grain that our civilizations are built upon, and then okra, because that's a journey. That simple vegetables journey tells a story of the history of America, but it also, not only did it come west, it also went east. And so, I would start with rice and okra. Those two chapters, I think, are sort of the, two of my favorites.
Great. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, the book, instead of being organized by breakfast or dessert, is organized by ingredient. And so there are whole chapters devoted to how to cook different rice recipes or okra recipes, which kind of leads me to another perfect tie-in. Are there any dishes that didn't make it into the book that you wish did?
I wish that, I had saved room for squashes, right?
Mhm.
And dairy.
Sure.
Dairy doesn't get, see, that's one of those other thing, the group of milk, butter, cheese, all that stuff, which is again, something I grew up with, very much part of, my diet, and also, very much a part of living in the South, and, having milk and buttermilk and yogurt and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Uh, so, those two, I wish, I had thought more about it, and included those two as well, but then it would have made a bigger book, and I don't know if my editor would have liked it. Um, as far as recipes go, if it was anything left out, I mean, I feel like, there are only three, I think maybe four recipes that are three straight dessert, and then one kind of a snack. It could go as a dessert or like an afternoon snack. So wish I had spent more time exploring at least a few more recipes that are sweet. But overall, no. I mean, I think with, yes, there are a lot more recipes that could have been in the book, even with just the ingredients I chose. Uh, but I think the way it worked out, I think it's the rest, the chapters are big enough where, folks will get an idea of hopefully get an idea of what I am trying to get through.
Yeah, and talk to me a little bit more about how you decided to set up that book. Like, what did you take away from the writing process? You could do whatever you wanted, I'm sure, but you did choose to set it up by ingredient. And, there weren't a ton of desserts, but there were like a million different ways to cook okra or prepare corn. So, what led you to set the book up the way it is?
So for a very long time, I've been talking about the connections, the food connections of how there were so many similarities. One of the reasons I felt comfortable in the South is because when I first got here, there were foods that I had grown up eating, especially, things like okra and black eyed peas and rice and beans and eggplant and tomatoes, all this stuff I had grown up eating, and they were available in abundance. And so, I was talking about the connections, and I kept saying, "Hey, there has to be some sort of a connection." I don't do academic research, but if somebody were to, they will find that there are reasons why these foods have ended up where they have. And that being said, then I specifically wanted to write, because I'm making this case that I am Southern. I wanted to deal with Southern ingredients that were also ingredients that are very much Indian as well. So sort of talk about, this is how I was brought up eating these things. Here's what happened to them over here. And so I very carefully chose ingredients that made sense to Southern sensibilities.
Sure. And I want to ask you this too, as someone who is brown in the South, and you're a name in cooking. I'm curious, have you always cooked this way? The recipe is a lot of just traditionally Southern things like collard greens, but it also has a lot of recipes from your childhood. And I know sometimes people choose to remove parts of their identity from what they do, so they don't get pigeonholed as that person. You don't, maybe you didn't want to become like the guy that makes Indian food. Like, what did you think about that as you were starting to get into culinary school or cooking?
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't want to be, that Indian guy cooking Indian food in a small southern town, which is why for a very long time I refused and didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
But also, just remember that I left India when I was 18. I didn't really know how to cook Indian food. I mean, what I knew, what recipes I do know are, maybe 5, 6, 7 recipes that I had learned, from my mother. So my repertoire of Indian food, if you will, is very small.
Sure.
Now, I do know spices. I know how to season things because I have a palate that has, I've grown up on eating food that are seasoned. And so I could do that. But as I was learning to cook in the South, I mean, what I would come across, it's like, oh, that's great. I love mashed potatoes. They're great. They're pretty much, if you put enough butter and cream in them, they're perfect. But what if you just took those mashed potatoes and added a little bit of toasted cumin to them? See what happens, So those are the kind of things I could do. Now I wasn't, that didn't really make them Indian,
Right.
but it did add a flavor dimension, or a layer of flavor that only I could think of because I had grown up eating potatoes with cumin. I don't know if that makes any sense to you or the listeners.
Yeah,
But
definitely. It also makes me wonder, correct me if I'm making this up, but you grew up vegetarian, right?
I did, yes.
Okay, so what's that like to suddenly have to learn how to prepare meat? I
I still haven't figured that out, right? I mean, that's yeah, I mean, this concept of a big chunk of meat in the middle of a plate, sort of, and then everything else built around it is a very American concept, or maybe American and Canadian. It's a North American concept, or maybe Argentinians and Brazilians do that too. But it's certainly a New World concept, because almost everywhere else in the world, the meat is sort of the flavoring, and then you have everything else, right? So that being said, yeah, it was. I mean, the transition was not easy. I mean, I didn't know first. I just didn't know what to do with it. I mean, because I hadn't even eaten it. So it's like, how do you cook it? I mean, that's I didn't know where to start. So it was a learning process, and slowly, and I would watch other people cook it, and then try to emulate them. And then I would go and get recipe books and read recipes and try to follow them. But initially it was very difficult because I didn't know what the end product was supposed to look like. Right. There's no concept of, what does
fried chicken.
Yeah. I mean, I knew what the outside of fried, and that was fried chicken, maybe a little bit easier, but I mean, just things like a pot roast, it's like, how long does a pot roast need to pot before it is where it needs to be? I don't know. I mean, this thing says 4 hours or until 4:10, but I don't know what that means. So it took a while to figure it out. And there was some trial and error, and some overcooked things and some undercooked things, and some things that didn't taste very good. But I worked through it, and had good enough friends and neighbors who were like, we don't know what you're trying to do here, but let me show you how to do it, or here's the recipe I use, and this is how you do it. So I've been very fortunate in that sense of having folks around me who had my back and didn't just let me flounder.
Yeah, I can tell that from a lot of the recipes in your book that you they seem to recall fond memories of experiences with people and food that maybe the recipe foundation wasn't your idea, but you've taken what someone else has done and are kind of building.
Right. Yeah.
That makes me wonder too. I'm sure, culinary school taught you a lot, but you also have had the chance to cook with a lot of great chefs. Are there any chefs that you've looked up to or drawn inspiration from during your career?
There's so many, right? So, I mean, John Curran's the first obvious one, right? But then other Southern chefs, Ben Barker, Ashley Christensen, Frank Stitt, going down to Florida, Norman Van Aken, and then a couple of chefs of Indian descent, Floyd Cardoz, who passed away due to COVID early, and Raji Jalapalli, who was cooking in Memphis in the 90s, just doing phenomenal French technique with Indian flavors. So those are just to name a few, but I mean there are many more.
I'm going to keep going on my questions, but my reminder to everyone is please ask questions. That's what we're here for. Another question I have from you is, and let me pull up my list. What advice would you give to someone who wants to become a chef or is entering the culinary world, especially if there's someone—
You froze up for a second. Can you repeat that, please?
Oh, sure. What advice would you give to someone that's just getting into culinary school or starting out, especially if they're from a marginalized background?
If people want to go to culinary school, I would say first, before you do that, maybe spend 6 months working in the kitchen. Find a chef whose food you like and work in the kitchen before you go spend $30,000-$40,000 for culinary school, and make sure that is what you want to do. So start there, and then the other is be proud of who you are and what you bring to the table, because everybody has different ways of doing things and different foods they've grown up with. They are just as important as anything you will learn in culinary school. I mean, clearly, usually culinary schools are geared towards a certain type of cuisine, and you will take, classes, and there'll be some, small segments of international food or something like that. But just because that's how the school is set up doesn't mean the food of your people is not important. And remember that as you're learning the process. I mean,
That's really good advice.
yeah.
Another question from someone that's related to the book is, what is one recipe from your book that you would most recommend for beginners?
There is a recipe for potatoes with cumin and black pepper. That's a real simple one to start, and it's then there's the recipe for whole grilled okra, and it's that simple. You take.
I did that this weekend, and it was so good.
Yeah.
I never cooked okra before, so that was yeah.
That's an easy one. There are a couple of recipes. A tomato soup recipe is a good one. That's it'll certainly challenge some of your notions of what tomato soup should taste like. But it's an easy one to make. And right now is a great time to do it because tomatoes are everywhere. There is a sort of a stir-fry rice recipe that's a great one. I think that's a good place. There's a real simple catfish pate recipe that's fun and simple. There are a couple of fried catfish recipes. One fried Indian style, one sort of just a classic cornmeal fried catfish. Both of those good place to start. There's a whole roast chicken recipe, and all you do is brine the chicken, season the chicken, stick it in the oven, and drink a couple of glasses of wine while it cooks. So
easy.
Yeah.
Someone has a food related question now. How do you address the slime in okra? I also want to know the answer to this.
How do I?
How do you make sure it doesn't turn out all weird and slimy?
It doesn't. I mean, see, here's the thing, right? The whole point of okra is the slime, right? Mm-hmm. First, so let's not forget what okra is meant to do. What it was intended to do in West Africa, how it's used and how it came here. It was used specifically for that purpose of thickening things, right? Which is why okra went into, to give it body. Now, does it always have to be slimy? No. Okra gets slimy when it comes in contact with water or moisture. So if you cut okra and you add water, you are going to get slime. So if you are stir frying it, or if you grilling it, or if you're frying it, you won't have the slime issue. Also, if you don't cut the okra and don't expose the membrane inside, then you won't have a slime issue. So, but I mean, that gooiness of okra is something to be appreciated and understand that is the whole purpose of that vegetable. I mean, doesn't mean.
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead. I'm saying doesn't mean that you have to like it, but I'm just saying, learn to appreciate it. Learn to appreciate what it does. What it does in a gumbo, or when you made stewed okra and tomatoes. That texture, the creaminess that you get in that stew is because of the okra and what the okra does. So
yeah. That makes me think a lot about like you said, like we discussed earlier, there is a whole chapter of your book that's devoted to okra. Mm-hmm. I'd never cooked okra before, but I do consider myself like a pretty confident chef, but I found myself being kind of intimidated, being like, I've never handled this before. It seems kind of complicated. I'm a little intimidated to try this. So what do you say to people who maybe want to start cooking, and maybe they want to use your book and use your recipes, but it just seems a little over their head?
That's it. Just dig in. I mean, the advice I give to anybody and everybody that wants to make a recipe ever is read the entire recipe first, right, from start to finish. A lot of people have the habit of looking at an ingredient and go running off to get it and then coming back and running don't do that. Read the whole recipe so that you have already in your head what the next step is going to be, right? You will, I mean, trust me, you will remember it as you are going through it, and then you can of course follow it gradually, step by step. But sit down and take 5-10 minutes and read through the entire recipe and the process of how it's made one time before you start making it. And if you do that, the whole process becomes very easy.
Nice. Another question someone had is there a special recipe in the book that you prepare differently for yourself than the recipe in the book says?
No, every recipe in the book is the way I make them.
Nice. Someone is asking also, I'm just going to read it out. My husband and I are driving from the coast from Pass Christian to dine at your restaurant Thursday evening. What of all your wonderful offerings is the premier menu item we should try?
First of all, welcome to Oxford. Unfortunately, I will be driving down to where you are because I have a book event in Ocean Springs. So I will not be here, but I would recommend, the menu right now is, we're still in summer. So the okra chaat is on the menu. So I would start there as sort of your first place to go. We have a great oyster bar. So if you like raw oysters, and I'm hoping that because you're from Pass Christian, you like raw oysters. So get a dozen oysters, and after that, I like the that's after that, I mean, the moussaka is one of my favorites on the menu right now. The pork dish is a nice and simple dish. That's I like right now. The Gulf fish, whatever fish we have in that day is always, people love it. And then the shrimp fricassee recipe, which is on the menu, is also in the book. Is a nice light summer recipe that I'm really fond of at this point.
Yum. I've heard great things about the okra chaat. I want to try it next time I'm there. I had one more big question for you. And if anyone else doesn't have any questions after that, I think we'll probably wrap it up. But when we spoke towards the end of our interview, you talked about how, the South has a long way to go. Just like India, there is inequality here. And you said, quote, the only way I know how to talk about it is through food. Like, okay, here's what we eat. Here's what it comes from. Let's start that conversation. Someone asked, can you talk a little bit more about the importance of community and what it means to you?
I mean, without community, you are nothing. I mean, the whole point, I mean, because we are social beings, we want to belong, right? I mean, and that's the struggle from childhood onwards. I mean, you are trying to fit in and belong. And sometimes you're fortunate enough to be amongst people who will welcome you and take you in and take care of you, and then in turn, then you take care of them, and that's how you grow up and have fond memories of things. The reverse of that is you go somewhere, you're not really taken in, you're shunned, and then you say, oh, I hate that place. So community is everything, right? I mean, it that makes or breaks your experience of being somewhere, and of how you think of yourself. And it also gives you, self-esteem comes from having a community that cares and nurtures. So that's, I mean, I don't know if that's a complete answer or not, but that's what I feel about it. And community doesn't just mean your neighborhood. It means a bigger, the town you're in, whether folks in the town, whether the leadership in the town is doing what it's supposed to do to make sure that that the citizens are taken care of. I mean, this can get really, we can get off track here quickly, but even just looking, if you even just look within your small, whether it's family or friends, or you have to have somebody who is going to support you, encourage you, but at the same time also be there to tell you when you're doing something that's maybe not, when you're getting off track, somebody who can sort of herd you back in. Now that doesn't mean you want folks to limit what you can do, That's not what I'm talking about, but I'm just saying, somebody who can, if you're having a tough time or going through a rough patch, you need somebody to, talk you through it and bring you back. So I mean, that's the role of community and family and friends. And so, yeah, that's everything.
Yeah, that was kind of my takeaway from your book, was that this is a way to foster that community,
Yes.
share a meal with someone, and let
Yeah.
it spark conversation.
Right.
We've had someone else submit a question that says, I realize the focus of his wonderful food, but could Chef Fishwesh share insights on the wonderful painting above his fireplace?
That's Ellen Langford. She's an artist out of Jackson. We love her work. She I first saw her work and another mutual friends who is an artist, Tony DeFada, who used to live in Jackson, work in Jackson, now lives in Ocean Springs. Another Mississippi artist. He's a friend, and so I saw Ellen Langford's work there, and always wanted a piece, and this piece sort of spoke to my wife and I. It's to me looks like a tablescape with people sitting around, and I don't know if they're sharing a meal, but it seems like that, and it made perfect sense to have in the house.
Yeah, Ellen is great. I will second that. All right, guys. Well, if you don't have any more questions, I think we're going to end tonight's book club. I want to thank you all so much for, like I said, spending your Monday night with us, and also you, Chef, for giving us your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
I don't know, and the journalist in me has to ask, is there anything I didn't ask that you would like to share?
If you didn't ask, I don't want to poke the bear and have you ask. No, I mean, I think we covered it. I mean, I just, all I want to tell people is, don't, go look at the book. I mean, go buy the book. Clearly, I mean, that's, I want you to do that. Not just because I wrote it, but because I think I think it turned out really nice, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. And there's some great stories in there. There's some funny stories in there too. So
wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a great night. Thank you for joining Mississippi Today's book club event. And there'll be more like this in the future, so please continue checking the site for them. Bye, everyone.
bye. Good night.
Good night.